I want to tell you the story of why we're here every March 13th at 10 a.m. And that is because Clarence Darrow and you too, and friends of his made a pact with each other that whoever died first, their ashes would be scattered somewhere. And if it was at all possible, at the time people believed that they were communing with the dead all the time. So they said, if it's really possible, we'll be there at 10 a.m. on the anniversary of the death of whoever goes first. So it was Darrow. He went first. And he had his ashes thrown right there in this place that he loved. And much later,
Darrow just called.
I knew he'd come. There had to be something with this group of people about March 13th, right? Darrow will come, the weather will be great. Never happened before. Anyway, I wanted to take a minute and remember other spirits that helped, that founded this event and that came every year. One is Linda Prey, our alderman of the 5th Ward of many years, who came to this. I don't know if he lived till he was past 100.
101.
101, thank you. Okay, and he came and talked to us, but at the end, he was here reliably, as were others. Two of them were the Weinbergs, Anita's parents. Where's Anita? Her parents, who were Darrow's biographers, and they were part of getting this going. And then there was Judge, or sometimes Justice Seymour Simon, who was a wonderful, wonderful advocate against the death penalty, which most of you probably know was very close to Darrow's heart, and Len's, and most of us. And Elmer Gertz, who was a great trial lawyer in the tradition of Clarence Darrow. And they all came every year, and then they said why Darrow was here, because of what they believed that we were still holding on to, and that's why we come here, to hold on to those principles. So I thought we were going to have more trouble summoning Darrow this year because of the construction zone. Boy, was I wrong. But we have somebody here who's a young person. I think young people must be attractive to spirits of the dead. Don't you think so? And that is Marissa Howe. And Marissa, where are you? Come here. Marissa, are you a junior in high school?
I am, yeah.
She's a junior in high school. And Marissa won a prize last year for a project she did about Darrow. And in fact, the committee that puts this event together, the Clarence Darrow Commemorative Committee, has started a prize with the Chicago Metro History Fair. And I've asked, we're going to get to see some of Marissa's work when we go inside, whoever comes inside. But she's the first winner of that prize. And when you go inside, you'll be able to see like a little documentary that she put together. But I asked her to tell us why she wanted to do something about Darrow.
Okay, so what I made was for a history event. It was a 10-minute long documentary about Darrow, about what he did during his life and why it is important. And one of the reasons why I was first interested in Darrow was coming in from a perspective where I had no idea who he was. The first thing that really struck me about him was the fact that he was incredibly ahead of his time in so many issues. He was involved in so many cases and he did so much in his lifetime. And it was all very radical and very important for his time, especially with the cases that he was involved in. And all of those things struck me enough that I decided to make a documentary about him, and it did eventually win the prize that was given out in, I believe, May. That was quite an honor.
And Well, we're so glad you did it. Thank you. So if you know young people, tell them about this prize. We want things about Darrow or about anything that Darrow cared about. Now, I can't see, but I think she was that way. I'd like to call on Leslie Hairston. Leslie, we want to congratulate Leslie because she just had a great big win to still be our alderman. And I heard a rumor that when you complete this term, you will have served as long as Linda Prey. Is that true?
That is correct.
Well, lucky for us, she's a hard-working lady. So talk to us.
Thank you. It is my honor to be here. I've been coming here for almost 2 decades now. I do miss my friend and my mentor, Linda Prey. We shared so many conversations about the world and what is going on over the years. And I think that he would be very disturbed at what he sees going on in the world today. What we're seeing in states across the United States, the way people are treating one another. I think that Clarence Darrow would be appalled at the way we as citizens are acting towards other human beings. Whether you're talking about racial relations, whether you're talking about immigration, whether you're talking about anything that impacts the lives of people and their ability to be free citizens, I think they would be more active than ever. And so I am pleased to be here today, as I am on every March 13th. Clarence talked to me this morning, and he gave me a message for you all. And he said for us to continue the fight. The work is not over. So thank you.
So while we're still in the 5th Ward, that's our 5th Ward alderman, I'd like to call on Louise McCurry. I'm not seeing people. Here she is. Louise is the president of the Jackson Park, this is Jackson Park Advisory Council, and she agreed to tell us what's happening by way of construction there and what's going to happen to our beloved Clarence Darrow Bridge.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure
Thank you
coming
so
today.
much. Yeah.
Welcome on the fact that spring is here. We know it now. We've got sunshine. We've got great things. So we need all of you to help in work days in the park. We have a job for everybody. Clarence Darrow Bridge is very important because it's where we start all of our tours for Jackson Park. Every Saturday from May until July, we give free tours there, including stories about Clarence Darrow and the story of Darrow's life. Luis Benitez, who's the architect for CDOT that we've been working with for the last 2 years now, it seems like forever. The plan has been to first of all get the funding to repair the bridge. The funding is out now there. Now we have a new governor. The problem now is the new governor to sign off on the pay order to actually pay the architect who's putting together the plans to make it happen. And as these things go, we have a new governor with a different party, and that may take some time, as I understand. Lewis was going to be here today, but I guess I did not make it, which is too bad. But anyway, the important thing is that things are happening slowly but surely as these things happen. There's going to be a new decorative fence. They decided our chain link fence wasn't quite pretty enough, so a new decorative fence is going to go up to make it look more in keeping with the park district, and that's supposed to go up sometime this month. But things are happening. We keep calling and writing and getting people out to meetings, and little by little we now have a plan for a new bridge. The bridge will look like it looked at the World's Fair of 1893. The idea is going to be that beautiful Clarence Darrow Bridge before it was named after Clarence Darrow. It'll be that wonderful bridge for the World's Fair. It'll be gorgeous, and it'll be a wonderful, wonderful addition to the park. But it's going to take time, and that's okay because we understand how important it is to get it right the first time. So it's part of the whole Project One putting process of putting back wonderful trees and flowers and opening up the Woodlawn the way that Olmsted planned it, the way that Olmsted designed it. And the bridge will just be one more part of it, but a beautiful, beautiful part. It is, this bridge is actually, as it looked in 1893, is my screensaver for my computer. So I look at it every single day and say, it's happening little by little. So very soon, just keep up the good work. They're saying by 2017, it will be done.
Oh my
so
goodness.
That's our goal.
Thank you so much. Well, Well, it'll be a place that Darrow will recognize. That's a good thing. You know, Darrow, sorry, Darrow cared deeply about justice, as everybody, we all know. And for him, and for many of us, justice is entwined with worker justice. So we have always wanted to have a representative from labor here to be part of this, and we have that guy. This is Larry Spivak, who is the regional director of AFSCME's, the director of AFSCME's Regional Council 31, I got it, and the president of the Illinois Labor History Society. So it's a nicer day than I thought it would be. Say whatever you want.
Thank you, Nina. Oh gosh, I love Nina. Every single program, Nina is there, and we remember United Packing House Workers of America and her family and their heritage. And I see the spirit of our founder, one of our founders of the Labor History Society, Les O'Rear, and his daughter Lynn is here to say hello. But Les is here, who went a little bit on Len Dupre and Studs Terkel and made it this last May to 103. But he would be actually in so many ways enthusiastic beyond any of us could be, because that's who he was. And I think that he lived through the spirit of Clarence Darrow. Clarence Darrow, who is what has been around here a lot lately because we just achieved national park status, called National Monument in Pullman, Illinois, where he cut his teeth on labor because he went from being a management railroad attorney to saying, you know what? Justice is about solidarity. It's about people working together. It's about an organized labor movement and trying to begin to realize that it's time to get out of the Gilded Age and into the modern age. And we move that way, but unfortunately in some ways we move back as we move forward, which is happening today in the world of workers and society, perhaps because of the politicians we elect or we don't elect, when only 18% of the people voted to elect this governor out of the 30% or 33% that voted. So is it a democracy? I think Clarence Darrow would say it can't be a democracy if workers have to choose between no pension, unlivable wages, the attack on their constitutional rights to have a pension. And he would say this to the current governor, and he would say this to any Democrat that supports those positions. Just as he had to say to the Democratic president in 1894 that he thought it was a bad idea that the president of this country, a Democrat, sent in federal troops. And so, to quell the Pullman strike. So if Clarence Darrow looked at this document, which I think is great, that there's already a document for the national park, if you love your national park maps, he would say, where's the picture of Eugene Debs? And so the Labor History Society is going to keep working to make sure that Eugene Debs and A. Philip Randolph's picture are on here, on this cover, with George Pullman. So thank you, Clarence, for being with us today, because you're going to help the rest of us go back and end those right to work for less laws, to save the pensions of working people in this country, to raise the standard of living so that the idea that what he stood for was a democracy, economic democracy. Thank you.
So now we want to hear from Gene Winkler, who's been a faithful participant here for many years, and who you were the pastor of Chicago Temple for a long time. I understand you're retired now, I think very busy probably. And he has been reminding us of what Darrow cared about every time he comes. Do it again.
One of my heroes is the Danish 19th century writer Søren Kierkegaard. I was in Copenhagen last year to give a lecture at the 200th anniversary of Kierkegaard's life and work. an amazing man. Kierkegaard wrote 45 books before he died at the age of 42. And he loved geese. I'm not as fond of geese as Kierkegaard was. But one of his parables, one of his stories he told was about these geese, religious geese, who every Sunday morning would gather in the barnyard to worship, and the preacher goose would get up on the fence and preach to the geese. And he would say, look at those geese flying up there, up in the air. That's what we were meant to do. God created us to fly, to be creative, to go forward, to do great things. And the geese would all say, amen, amen. And then, when the preacher got down from the fence, they would all go back into the barn to be fattened up for the kill.
Yeah.
We come here today like those geese. We come here, I've been coming here 40 years. Lynn Dupre, whose office was in the Temple building, as was Clarence Darrow's, was one of my mentors, one of my best friends. Herb Krause, Anita's parents, the premier biographers of Darrow. And now I'm the youngster. And I think of all these times we've come here, and like those geese, we've said amen, amen. And then we've gone back to our nice middle-class lives and done nothing. Now, friends, think about Ferguson and New York City and Cleveland and the south side and the west side of our city. Think about what we are about. We can't just leave this place today and go back after saying amen about Clarence Darrow and what he stood for in terms of labor and the death penalty and all of these issues and continue to live as if nothing had happened. If we believe in Clarence Darrow and what he stood for, let's go forth from this place to make a difference, to change the life of this country in a very perilous time.
Yes, thank you. I know some people here who are going forth already, but we always can use reminders, right? Thank you. So, that's the end of the outside talking. We're going to bring our flowers to Clarence in case he didn't make it all the way here. And then we're going to go inside the museum for whoever can come. There'll be other people there, I'm quite sure. Yes, we did.
And we're going to have the program.
I'm Anita Weinberg, one of the conveners of this program now. And as those of you who've been here before know, each year we focus on a pressing topic or issue or challenge of the day that unfortunately also existed when Darrow was alive and on which he held very strong views and worked hard to overcome or to enforce his positions. The rights of labor unions, death penalty, freedom of speech, racial justice and equity, elimination of inequality and poverty. Unfortunately, our society and our state of the state right now has made it very easy for us to come up with topics that we can explore every year. This year we've chosen to focus on the issue of immigration and explore the role of undocumented laborers in immigration. So I want to tell you a little bit briefly about Darrow's views on immigration, and there's not that much. However, in 1929, he participated in a debate with Dr. Lothrop Stoddard, an American historian, journalist, eugenicist, and political theorist. Over his lifetime, Stoddard authored over 24 books, most related to race and civilization, focusing primarily on the dangers posed by colored peoples to white civilization. So you can already imagine where Darrow may have come out in dealing with Stoddard. The debate topic resolved that the immigration law discriminating in favor of the races of Northern Europe as opposed to those of Southern Europe is an advantage to the United States. The 1924 Immigration Act being debated came about following the end of World War I and the post-war recession. Many Americans believed that bringing in more immigrants from other countries would only make the unemployment rate higher. The law established preferences under the quota system for certain groups. Darrow opposed the law, was troubled by the intent behind it, and in true Darrow style, was passionate, forthright, and challenging in his response to Dr. Stoddard. So a little flavor of his arguments. And it's all relevant today. His opponent spoke of people already in the United States as if they owned the country. And Darrow, providing a reality check and defending the underdog, responded, they came over here to get a chance. The real American was the Indian, and they solved that problem by killing him. My ancestors came here to get a better chance, and I don't believe in closing the doors on the people who would like to come for the same reason now. And then Dr. Stoddard argued that the laboring man is against immigration. And Darrow countered with his focus on justice. I have always been for the poor man or the laborer, but I am not for injustice as I see it either for the rich man or the poor man. And then Stoddard argued that countries have a right to set rules and to set limits on who enters their borders. And Darrow responded as the dreamer and with empathy, I don't agree with him because I have an imagination, and that is all. I can imagine myself being an Italian and wanting a better chance, or being a Russian Jew and wanting a better chance, or being an Austrian and wanting a better chance. It is hard for me to forget there are other people on earth besides the stock I came from. And then Darrow, as the antagonist, truly his passion and way he approached a lot of issues, he said, to me, this whole idea is narrow, selfish, unimaginative, and cruel. The whole movement is narrow, stupid, mean, contemptible. Somehow, I can't believe it is a good thing. I think it would be a good thing for the United States to get a little idealism into herself. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Boehm to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you. Our four committee members are Nina Helstein, Nina Barrett, Anita Weinberg, and myself. I do this in honor of my mother, Joy Darrow, who participated in probably about 4.5 decades of these events while she was alive. So I'm proud to be here in her name. She really cared about all these issues as well. I'm also really proud to introduce Tanya. I've known Tanya for many, many years as an organizer and sometime writer for Windy City Times. She's an immigrant queer community organizer, a nationally recognized leader in the undocumented and immigrant rights movement, and she was one of the first undocumented youth to step into the public light to challenge immigration laws. Most recently, she has been a key organizer for the Not One More Deportation campaign, and also she works for the Chuy Garcia for Mayor campaign. And let me just say, when we planned this before the election, we both said, well, he might do a runoff, and that'll be okay too. So welcome, Tanya.
I'm wearing my button. So thank you, Tracy, for the invitation, and thank you for to the Commemorative Committee for not letting us forget Clarence Darrow's legacy, as well as sharing some of that legacy with some of us who weren't as familiar with it. So yeah, thank you. I was reading that argument that we talked about, the 1929 immigrant defense argument, and one of the lines that struck me was, he said, if Jesus were to land in, I forget the exact place, but if Jesus were to land here, he'd be deported today. Wilmingham, I believe, is what he mentioned. And I can't tell you if that's true right now. I would have to look into Jesus's immigrant history, criminal history, where exactly he came from, how many times he's traveled or been deported to the United States. And to me, like, it's part of what I want to talk about today is precisely how immigrants are kind of divided into this good immigrant and bad immigrant categories. And I think part of what the argument that Darrow was making is that it's not just about looking at people's individual criminal history, immigration history, where they come from, but that when we talk about who's good and who's bad, who should be accepted and not accepted, who's in and who's out, it has to do with a bigger context than the individual. It has to do with the political context, with the racial context, with where people come from, poverty, how the historical context of the country. And I think that that's very much still true today. So I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit of my own history of how I came to work on immigrant rights, how I came to think of one of the campaigns that we were participating in as the Not One More campaign, as one of the goals that we should be trying to achieve. So I'll start with a little bit of my history, and then I do want to talk about where we are at today, precisely in terms of this judging who's a good immigrant, who's a bad immigrant, who gets to stay and who gets to go. I came to the U.S. when I was 10 years old with my parents. I was one of the, I think 60% of the 11 million immigrants who came here with a visa and overstayed and became undocumented since I was 10 years old. And growing up undocumented in the United States is, to say the least, slightly traumatic. It's not really knowing where you stand in the country. It's growing up learning about fighting for civil rights, about freedom, about what this country is supposed to represent, and at the same time feeling like you can't really access all those things and that those things don't really apply to you. It was trying to figure out who I could tell the truth to and who I had to lie to, and really understanding what that meant for my family and for my own stance in the United States. And so when I was in high school, I was trying really hard to be one of the good students. And every time, when teachers approached me about what scholarships I would be able to apply to, I would have to figure out whether I was going to say, no, I don't qualify because I'm not a U.S. citizen, or just kind of try to dismiss them. When I graduated from high school, I remember sitting down with my college counselor and him asking me, do you have a green card? And I said no. Him asking me, do your parents have thousands of dollars saved up for you to go to college? And I said no. And so he told me that the only way that I was going to be able to go to college was if I applied for an international student visa and applied as an international student. And what that meant was that I would have to leave the country, apply for an international student visa in Mexico, try to get the visa, and then be able to come back. And so I did. I was really angry actually at the time, and I remember thinking, I'm not gonna let whatever this is stop my education path. And I remember thinking, if I have to go to Mexico and that means I can't come back, that's fine, I'll figure it out. And so I left. I left at 17 years old. I went to Mexico. I went to the U.S. Embassy. I stood in these huge lines. They just have people kind of line up in this curved path. And you can see just like people are going there with all this hope and not knowing where they're going to. I went to the window and I gave them my application for an international student visa. I gave them my acceptance letter to the colleges that I had been accepted to. And they sent me into a little room where I talked to a woman who said to me, this is worth nothing. And she grabbed my acceptance letter and put 2 lines across it. She took my Mexican passport and put it in a drawer. And then she turned around to the guard and said, can you believe this girl? She's trying to go into the United States while she's been living undocumented. And I remember her telling me, because you've been going to public school, your parents owe thousands of dollars to the U.S. government because undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes. And she told me, you're not going to get your documents back until your parents pay that money and until you figure out like where you need to be. The thing is, like, I knew that my parents had been paying taxes. I had helped them figure out how we were gonna pay taxes, and you can actually, there's a number that you can use to pay taxes, whether you have a social security number or not. And I knew that, at the store, no one asks you, are you undocumented? Oh yeah, I won't charge you that 8%. And so to me, that was, I knew that was wrong. And being in Mexico, so what my parents started doing is they started organizing in the United States to try to see how they could get me back. And they went to community organizations, they went to congressmen, they went to senators. And it's one of those historical coincidences, I think, that they ended up talking to Senator Durbin, who that same summer had just discovered that there were these undocumented students who had been living in the United States for all of their lives that couldn't apply to be citizens, that couldn't go to high school. This was around 2001 summer. I graduated high school summer 2001. And Senator Durbin was able to actually bring me back into the United States through what was called a humanitarian visa, a humanitarian parole. But right before that happened, precisely because there were so many people like me, people started becoming interested both in my story and in the story of other undocumented students. And I remember reading an article in the Chicago Tribune by Teresa Puente, where she told my story and where she said, there's 60,000 to 80,000 undocumented students who graduate from high school every year, just like Tanya. And that was the first time in my life that I connected what was happening to me in my life to something bigger than myself, to a bigger historical, legal context that was happening to other people in the United States. And that was really the first time that I understood that it wasn't that my mom was being overprotective when she told me I couldn't go to the school trip to France, right? That it wasn't that the school was somehow discriminating against me when I couldn't get a job. As a lifeguard in high school, I was in the swim team. There was something bigger than all of us happening in the country if you had 60,000 to 80,000 undocumented students who were graduating every year and were facing the same problem. And so when I came back to the United States, I started talking about the issue publicly. And I wasn't saying I was undocumented yet, but it was kind of like, I just came back from Mexico and this is my story. And I, did press conferences with Senator Durbin, and I still remember the line that I would say at every press conference, and it was, there has to be something wrong in this country if 60 to 80,000 undocumented students who are dedicated, who are hardworking, can't go to school, can't go to college, can't work, because they're lacking a social security number. And, I was on my way to, this was again fall of 2001, and I was scheduled to go to testify in Congress in Washington, D.C. about the DREAM Act and about the need for the law to change. And my plane ticket was for September 11th, 2001. I remember that morning I woke up with a call from Clarisol Duque, who still works at Senator Durbin's office, her saying, this isn't gonna happen. Like, turn on your television, there's something bigger happening, you're not gonna testify today. And of course, saw the planes crashing into the towers in New York, and literally everything around immigration stopped on that day. I never got to testify. That congressional hearing never happened. And in the history of what was happening in immigration, everything just stopped, right? All conversations around immigration became about national security, about how we needed to protect the country from immigrants, and and there was no conversation about undocumented youth, people who were living in the United States, the need for workers to have rights regardless of whether they're undocumented or not. And I myself went back, we joke slightly about it, but I went back into the shadows, sometimes we say. I went to college, I was at UIC, I decided to just, I was like, I'm back, I'm gonna go to school the way I wanted to go, and we'll figure out this immigration thing along the way. And what ended up happening to me is that I kept running into immigration over and over again. I remember being in my sociology class, sociology of immigration, of course, and people, raising their hands and discussing whether undocumented immigrants had rights, whether the country had a right to limit who comes in and out of their borders. And I remember just like hearing people talking around me and thinking, you're talking about me, and you're talking about my parents, and you're talking about it as if we're not in the room. And so that was the first time actually in one of my sociology classes that I raised my hand and I said, you're talking about me, right? Like, I'm undocumented. Whenever you say undocumented immigrants are stealing your jobs, you're talking about me. And I remember my teacher at the time kind of came back and said, you gotta watch out where you say those kinds of things because you never know who's in the room. And I feel like I stopped talking about it too much, but there was something that really connected with me at that moment, not only in terms of this experience that I was having, but I was also starting to learn about the history of the gay and lesbian movement. I was starting to come out as a queer woman myself, and I was learning about the power of coming out and of sharing your story publicly as part of a political fight. And it just made sense to me that if people know that they're talking about you and your family and they're standing next to you or they're in the same class, that their perspective of what undocumented immigration is has to change. And so along the way, I met a couple of other young people. I was teaching this radio class at a community radio station, and most of my students were actually undocumented. And one of them, I remember, came to me and said, I have my own story, and raised up his jeans leg, and he showed me that he was wearing an ankle bracelet. And he told me the story, and the story was that he had been driving, he rolled through a stop sign, he had had a beer and was a minor, and he was undocumented. And while he was in jail, waiting, not even declared guilty or anything, while he was in jail, he was visited by an immigration agent who asked him where he was from, whether he had papers or not, and basically had him sign his own deportation right on the spot. So this was someone who had been living in the United States since he was 6 years old. He was an honor student at Harold Washington, transferring over to UIC, and basically in that process was the president of a couple of university clubs, and who had obviously made a mistake that had landed him basically in deportation proceedings. And that was, to me, kind of the moment where I got called back into the immigrant rights fight. Again, like I said, I had been kind of going to school and raising my hand here and there, but I hadn't had something like this where it was, I felt like I needed to come back and talk more about my story. And, because he had this beer, right, because there was this connection to potentially a driving under the influence charge, no one wanted to defend him. Everyone would say to us that he was a bad example of an immigrant and that, if anything, he deserved to get deported. And to me, this is where, again, like the writing of Clarence Darrow and the idea that like everything has a political context, that it's not as simple as guilty or not guilty, just and unjust, comes back. And so what we ended up doing was putting ourselves at the forefront to say, I'm undocumented. This could have happened to me. I could have been at the wrong place at the wrong time. I could have made a mistake. So when you say like this person deserves to be deported, you're also saying that to me. And so we ended up doing this entire movement almost exactly 5 years ago, where we were talking to each other and saying, you know what, like it actually does change things when you say to someone, I'm undocumented. And not only does it change the perspective of people who are on the outside, it actually made an impact on us because we had been hiding this whole time, because we didn't know when it was okay to say it and when we would have to lie, basically, as undocumented people. And so we decided to, I remember we were in this room and someone said, like, isn't there like a national coming out day for the LGBT community? Wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of national coming out of like somewhere around undocumented issues? And one of my friends says, where do undocumented people come out of? It's not the closet. Where do we come out of? And this is where, the shadows. Okay, so let's call it National Coming Out of the Shadows Day. And the first National Coming Out of the Shadows Day was on March 10th, 2010, almost 5 years ago. And actually, there will be another one tomorrow at Federal Plaza at 12:30, where people will be speaking publicly about their stories. And so that was the first time that I stood up in front of a crowd of people and I said, my name is Tanya and I'm undocumented. And there were like 10 other people lined up behind me who were saying the same thing. And at that moment, we actually had no idea what that would mean. There had been stories in the past. There was a young woman, Tam Tran, that in 2003 ended up testifying in front of Congress about her undocumented status, and immigration came to her parents' house the next day and detained them. And so there were histories and precedents of people being pursued for coming out and talking about their undocumented status. I was at risk of losing my job because, not supposed to be working. And again, we didn't know whether we were putting our parents at risk, so it wasn't just about us. And so we were trying to be very careful, but also knowing that we needed to take risks, and that that the change that happens only comes when people take these risks. And so we talked about it a lot, and we ended up saying, like, yes, we're gonna do this. So on March 10th, we had our first National Coming Out of the Shadows. And I won't go into this many details in terms of the rest of the stuff, but one of the things that's been really important is that along the way, we realized that, so a lot of things have changed since then, right? We have the Deferred Action Program from the president that actually has given people like me a chance to have a work permit and have a driver's license, and this is how I'm able to work for the Chuy Garcia campaign today with a work permit. And it's given people an incredible different sense of like being able to belong in the United States. But it's still this very clear line between who is considered a good immigrant and who's considered a bad immigrant. And what we didn't know at the time as undocumented students was that we were actually feeding very much into that rhetoric and into that dichotomy. That by saying I'm undocumented and I have great grades and I've never been arrested and I speak English, and for some people they started saying, and it's not my fault because my parents brought me here. That was not our line. We were very much about standing with our parents and with their decision, but that was being said especially by politicians. And the reality is that through the years, as people have been able to gain some sort of foothold and some sort of status, we have left people out. And so we're at a place now where, there's about half of the undocumented population has some sort of status, deferred action, and which is not citizenship, which is not stable, which you have to apply for every 2 to 3 years now, and then the other half doesn't. And so, for example, my parents don't qualify for any of the deferred action stuff because I'm not a citizen, and only people who are parents of citizens have been able to qualify. I think in Illinois, it's something like 52% of the not in Illinois, in Cook County, 52% of the undocumented population doesn't qualify for anything. And so that means you leave people in limbo, you leave people at risk. And the danger of being targeted and of being deported increases when you've been deported in the past, when you have some sort of criminal history, and when you have very little time in the United States. And so in the last week, immigration announced that they had done this operation cross-check, they call it, where they detained and deported 2,000 people who they're calling criminal aliens. And some people have some pretty bad criminal history, and of course that's the history that they highlight. But you also have people who have felonies because they came back into the United States after being deported. You have many people who are being deported because they have DUIs. And not that a DUI is a simple thing, but to me, it shouldn't be a reason why someone gets deported. And so what we're working on now is not just talking about why the good immigrants deserve to stay, but really thinking through how the country uses deportation as a punishment, and as a way to define who's good and who's bad. And so I'm working on this campaign, and I'm wrapping up. I'm working on this campaign at a national level. Right after the mayoral race, what I'm going back to is the Not One More campaign, which is a national campaign of people from all over the country that are trying to really break down the ways in which we separate immigrants into good immigrants and bad immigrants, and say that we need not one more deportation. And so I hope that you get more involved. I hope that you, I think as much as we've been able to advance, there's a lot of work still to do. And I hope that one day we are able to say that if Jesus comes to this country, whether he's undocumented or not, he won't be at risk for deportation. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Tanya. So our final guest speakers, I think Joanne's going to be speaking. Is that correct? So we have Sister Patricia Murphy and Joanne Perch, who are here, and they were in the outdoor as well. They are true heroes. We are so lucky to have them in the Chicago area, let's just say, because to me they're international heroes on the work that they've been doing for decades on the issue of immigrants and refugees seeking political asylum and or as survivors of torture and other underrepresented populations. Every Friday, they hold a well-attended interfaith vigil at a detention center and provide pastoral care twice a week to prisoners being deported from the U.S. So welcome, Joanne, and I'm sure they'll be around afterwards if you also have questions for Patricia. Thank you.
Good morning. As we walked through to get to this room, Pat said to me, "Do you miss your teaching days?" We saw the little bodies on their field trips, and it was a wonderful time in my life. I can't say that I miss it now. It was very dark this morning when we left our home. And as we arrived in Broadview at the Immigration or ICE Staging and Processing Center, there were many families there already. Pat and I started standing outside of Broadview in January of 2007. So we are in our 9th year of standing there. Believe me, we are very grateful today that the temperature is a little bit milder. It's been a brutal winter. But the first day we stood there, we had lived and worked in a house called Su Casa Catholic Worker, and these were Central American refugees seeking asylum. So we had great experience with this issue of torture. And we had left that community. The house will be 25 years old this year. But we thought we'd look for a new challenge. So we heard about a lawyer who was so frustrated because he couldn't win his immigration cases that he decided, maybe if I pray, it will help. Believe me, that, I swear, was one of the coldest days we have had in Chicago. So Pat and I arrived to meet this man we didn't know at the time. And he was very good in explaining what was happening. We saw vans coming, and then later we saw the buses going. And he told us that the vans were bringing these men and women, who we might want to call the bad immigrants, from the jails where they were being held to be deported that day. And that the men and women on those buses were being taken to an airport and flown out of the country. And I can't tell you the impact that had on Pat and me that day to realize what our country was doing And later, our new Pope, I said, stole my line, because the image that grabbed me was we're moving pieces on a chessboard, and they have no control. And Pope Francis a while ago said that migrants are not pieces on a chessboard. I said, he stole my line. But I think, therefore, it must be a good image. Roy Berg, the lawyer, was going to pray there once a month. And we both got in the car and looked at each other and said, we have to be here every Friday. And that was the beginning of a journey we never dreamt of. It led us to things we never knew we could do. But it has been a tremendous education, as well as a wonderful partnership with so many men and women. Out of that morning has grown the Interfaith Committee for Detained Immigrants. We are so proud now, we've had to incorporate, but we're proud that we have over 200 volunteers representing 15 different faith groups. And because we feel this is an issue of faith and morality, and it's not a Catholic issue, it's a faith issue, and it's a human issue. About someone spoke at the bridge of how we treat human beings, and that's what drives us. Well, we thought logically, but immigration doesn't think logically. We thought that we should go in there and pray with the people being deported and give them some support on that journey. Well, of course, you know the answer that we were given. Well, no, you can't go in there. So we have a motto now that we do things peacefully and respectfully, but we never take no for an answer. And the reason we can't say no is because we have the voice to speak for those men and women who are being treated less than human. We started talking to families outside of Broadview. We heard about the court system, the terrible court system. And so we said to the lawyer, well, we want to see that. He said, oh, I can get you in there. And so we went with our notebooks, and he said, it makes the judge sit up a little straighter to know that you're sitting there. Now we have a court watch program. We have someone in the detained immigration court every morning and every afternoon with their court watch button. They know we're there. The ICE prosecutor one day said to one of our court watchers before the judge came, hey, Mr. Court Watch Man, are you going to write nice things about me today? So they know we're there and they know what we're doing. But for the immigrants, it says, somebody cares about me. Somebody knows I'm here. That has driven us to do some desperate things, thanks to a group where we know Tanya's mother, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights. They asked us, would you lie down in front of the buses when they're going to the airport to say they won't let you in there and they are violating people's human and religious rights? And so we said, yes, we would. And so somehow, thanks to Fred at the Illinois Coalition, they got great press prior to the event. And it said, these two spry elderly nuns are going to lie down for this purpose. And they told our ages, and I said to Fred, Fred, elderly? I don't mind you tell my age, but elderly? He said, well, I said spry. But there's an advantage to being elderly and a nun. And this got all the way to Washington. And I got a call from the head of ICE in the Midwest saying, Sister Persh, we would like to negotiate with you. And we had agreed if they negotiated to anything, we would celebrate. So we did. We got a tour of Broadview, and he said Pat and I could get on the bus going to the airport. So that Friday morning we did, and our thought was we'd walk down the aisle, touch everybody, tell them we're walking with them. We got on the bus, and where we stand is this big. There's plexiglass and a grate and benches, like 3 cages. Everybody was shackled, hands and feet, with the chain around their waist. I cannot tell you when we got off, we just could not contain our emotion in seeing what our country is doing, treating people like animals to get them out of our country. It took almost another year, but we now are inside Broadview. We still pray on the buses. We have the vigil. We have the court watch. But then somebody talked about the detention centers. So we marched out to Woodstock, Illinois, which for us is not a short trip because we live 115 south, and that's almost to the Wisconsin line. And we went in with our great program, and of course, what do you think they said? We don't need you. Well, again, thanks to the Illinois Coalition, they wrote a bill that said that religious workers had to be permitted to meet with immigrant detainees. And the bill passed. The long story, we learned a lot about lobbying. The bill passed unanimously in the House and Senate. It was signed into law. It became law. Guess what? They wouldn't let us in there. But we can't take no for an answer. So we had to go to Dan Burke, who sponsored the bill, and he said something that isn't in the movie that he's in with us. But anyway, he said, I guess I'll have to go out there with you. So we came out to Woodstock with Representative Jack Franks. The sheriff tried to discourage him. He said, I'm worried about the safety of the sisters. And we said, excuse us, we've worked in the projects, we've lived in a house with recovering addicts. There's no guarantee about everything. We'll sign a waiver. Now we're in our 6th year at McHenry County Jail. We go every Tuesday. We meet the most wonderful men and women, just like Tanya talked about, DUIs, coming back into the country. Some of them have been here since they're babies. They're going to be deported. They say, one guy told me, I've never been in that country. Well, he must have been there to be born, but he must have come as a baby. And so he's going back where he has no family. I met a young guy one day, redhead, spoke fluent English. He said, I'm leaving today. Oh, great, where are you going? He said, to Slovenia. I said, do you speak that language? No. Do you have family there? No. But he was being deported that day. So we do what we call pastoral care, but it's really a ministry of presence. We sit one-on-one with the immigrant. We can bring a whole team of volunteers with us. We can bring, nobody else in the country can do this. We bring bags of stuff. We can bring sheets that we write information that we take out with us. We call their families, even if they might be in Mexico or Europe somewhere, to let them know. Often the families don't know if they died along the way. They have not heard from them and they're worried sick. At the request of ICE, of Mr. Ricardo Wong, the head of ICE, we just began this in Kenosha County. Every new venture is a challenge, let's say, and we're in there a little over a month, and we've made progress. So we're not quite where we want to be, but we just keep peacefully and respectfully asking until we can see where we are. Our last program, our post-detention program, began from a very sad story. Pat and I worked with a woman in jail for 8 months. She came every week, came up and thanked me because we put money in their commissary account if they don't have money. And she came every week to thank me for the purchases as a woman she was able to make, not having to request her needs of the guard. So for some reason we took a day off and we're two different places, and the lawyer called both of us needing a place for Marie Joseph to stay. And we said, we can't do it today. Can you put her somewhere? We will take care of it tomorrow. Pat got housing. She was at the Pacific Garden Mission, and we couldn't find her. 3 days later, she was found dead in an abandoned building. It broke our hearts. The lawyer was devastated, and the officers in the jail cried. They loved Marie Joseph. We went to her funeral. Her mother brought her little boys up from Georgia. These two little guys grabbed us around the waist, hugged us. Thank you for what you did for my mother. So we said, that can never happen again. So now we have a hotline. We have a team of men and women available every week who answer the hotline. And we do two things. When they're released from ICE custody, they're not free most of the time. If they can go home, the families paid a bond, and they may still be deported, but they're released in the clothes they were picked up in. Pat actually had a young man at Broadview being deported in his boxer shorts. Now we bring clothes to Broadview, but these young men and women standing out at 101 West Congress in shorts and a t-shirt in winter. So now we have a backpack of clothes with some juice boxes, power bars, whatever. We buy their bus ticket because mostly they have no money, and we make sure they get on the bus, give them food money for the journey. If they're going to California, New York, Nebraska, Texas, wherever, we give them a cheap track phone with minutes with one of our numbers, so if they're in trouble on the journey. However, people were being released who had nowhere to go. They have no work permit, they had no family here, and one man recently that we've taken, his court date is 2019. So they would be wandering the streets trying to go from shelter to shelter. So we started finding housing, paying people to keep some of them religious communities, homes, intentional communities. We said, we need a house. And so we started negotiating. The one that seemed most possible was in Cicero, Illinois. After we thought we had everything in order, the town told us, oh, you're not zoned for that. So another year later, after we went through the zoning committee, the zoning board, the town board, got our permits, we have the Marie Joseph House of Hospitality for Men in Cicero. We have 16 men from 15 different countries. By that time, we needed a second house. So in Hyde Park, we rented a floor of the Catholic Theological Union Residence Hall, and that was supposed to be the women's house. Now it's the women, family, teenager house, because whether you know it or not, we have 9 houses for children who are unaccompanied minors. The day they turn 18, we meet them in jail. There's a group at the University of Chicago trying to work with Heartland Alliance to get them out to us. We have 2 in Kenosha, a Chinese girl, a Honduran boy. We're working with the National Immigrant Justice Center to get them out. So from standing outside of Broadview in January of 2007, we keep growing and expanding. We're now asked to be a pilot to get families out of the detention centers on the border to bring them up to do case management. So it's been a challenge, but a wonderful, wonderful journey. And people say, how do you keep doing this? There's nothing changing, of course. Meanwhile, on the side, we're lobbying, writing letters, marching, whatever, to change the system. But we feel we're working with the ones who are trapped in the broken system and are people who deserve respect. Well, as Catholic sisters, for me anyway, the Last Judgment Gospel has always encouraged me, because sometimes I don't pray as much as I should, or I don't think I'm doing all the church things I should. But then I listen to that and I say, wow, whatever you do for any of my sisters and brothers, you do for me. Clothe me, feed me, visit me, take care of me, give me a house. But I heard another story that really drives us now, and it's an old rabbi story. And he had a class and he said, when does night become day? And oh, when I can tell the sheep from the goat in the field. No. When I can tell the fig tree from the pear tree. No. Well, you tell us. He said, it's when I can look in the eyes of every man and woman and see my sister or brother. Until then, it is night. And we all want to be people of light. So we all need to be aware of our immigrant sisters and brothers, who we can be the voice for them. We can stand up for them. We can say no more deportations, no more deaths in the desert. And as Moses said, let my people go. Thank you.
Thank you, sisters. Thank you very much. I'm Jim Conley, and I've been active with this for many, many years, but more wonderfully, I know these sisters. I had great aunts that were mercy nuns, and they do a wonderful job. 2-3 years ago, Jay Shefsky of Chicago Tonight did a story about these sisters at the Broadview on a very cold, wet day. If you have an opportunity, go online on Chicago Tonight and look at Jay's story and see what these sisters do to try to bring humanity and justice to all. It's well worth the view. So please look at that, and God bless you, and thank you, sisters.
So I think folks are going to hang around a little bit if you have some questions one-on-one. And we're passing a hat for contributions for the History Fair prize. Anything else, Anita, that you want to say? And we have a mailing list, too, to sign up on. We actually, okay, so we could take a few questions. We have time. Just say who your question's for, and they'll come up and answer. So do you have any questions for these fabulous people? And, we should have known to bring tissue. Sorry about that. I'm crying over here trying to videotape. Okay, so we'll just, if you have, sorry, Marissa has a question.
I had a question. It was for Tanya. It was, there's something that I've heard a lot in the whole debate over immigration about undocumented immigrants living in the United States, and I've heard people ask, why don't you just get documented? What do you say to that?
Trust me, I've tried. I don't know. I think when we talk about the broken immigration system, it really is because there is no way to get documents. Immigration status is incredibly complicated, right? Even my own, I've gone from having a visa to being undocumented to being a parolee to being undocumented again, and now a deferred action recipient. But there really is no way for me to become documented. There is no line, there is no application process. Yeah. Basically.
Yeah. Unless you're the inventor of Facebook or something. Right? Okay. Any final questions? Terrific. Well, I cannot thank these folks enough. This was an amazing program. Thank you to my co-chairs, Anita, Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria.